This is the story of the most expensive painting ever sold, a small panel depicting a Christ holding a crystal orb, hammered down at $450 million, and now hidden in a place no one can point to. It is also the story of why this painting has been linked to a Vatican secret, and of what the documents reveal when someone bothers to look at them closely. It is called Salvator Mundi, meaning the savior of the world, and its attribution to Leonardo da Vinci has dragged along one of the longest feuds in art history. For nearly 150 years, this painting vanished from every known record, and when it finally resurfaced, layers of overpaint had left it unrecognizable. In 1958, an auction dispatched it for £45, as if it were just another copy. 47 years later, two dealers rescued it for $1,175, and in 2017, it reached a figure that left the entire market breathless. We are going to trace that entire journey, from how it was born to how it was lost, how it was resurrected, how it became the most expensive object in art, and why it ended up disappearing once again. It is worth starting with the physical object, because its small size comes as a surprise. The Salvator Mundi is an oil on a walnut panel measuring roughly 65 centimeters tall by 45 wide, about 26 inches, a size that fits easily on an ordinary table. The image shows Christ facing the viewer from the waist up, wrapped in a blue Renaissance robe with a gold trim, his right hand raised in a gesture of blessing, and his left holding a transparent crystal sphere representing the celestial orb, the entire world resting in the palm of the Savior. Something important needs to be clarified from the outset. Leonardo did not invent this type of image. The composition has its roots in the Byzantine Christ Pantocrator and was developed above all by Flemish and Northern European painters, people like Jan van Eyck, Hans Memling, Robert Campin, Rogier van der Weyden, and Albrecht Dürer, long before the formula became fashionable in Italy. If Leonardo painted it, he was working from a mold that was already in circulation. The exact date of that authorship also lacks consensus. The curator Luc Sisson places it around 1499 or 1500. The expert Martin Kemp stretches the window to between 1504 and 1510, and the historian Frank Zöllner dates it to around 1507 or even later. Nearly 10 years separate one group of specialists from another. That discrepancy marks the first crack in a file full of gaps, and to grasp just how widely this work was copied, one figure suffices. Roughly 30 versions and variations exist, painted by Leonardo's pupils and followers, of which the dealer and researcher Robert Simon estimates that 2 left the master's own workshop during his lifetime, not counting the 2 preparatory drapery drawings in red chalk held by the Royal Collection at Windsor. The origin of the commission plunges us straight into the territory of hypotheses, and I prefer to say so bluntly. Christie's and various scholars pointed to a commission around the year 1500 from Louis XII of France and his wife Anne of Brittany, right after French troops had taken Milan and Genoa, an idea that the researcher Joanne Snowsmith championed in a 1978 article. Other names have cropped up on the list of possible patrons, including Isabella d'Este, who in 1504 wanted to commission a young Christ from Leonardo, as well as King Matthias Corvinus, Charles VIII of France, and a figure worth keeping in mind because he will reappear later, Pope Leo X. The oldest written trail that might refer to this painting surfaces in an inventory of 1525, that of the possessions of Salai, Leonardo's disciple, where a Christ in the manner of a God the Father is recorded. From that point onward, the trail flickers on and off for generations. The panel may have crossed to England around 1625, when Henrietta Maria of France married King Charles I, although the researcher Margaret Dalival cools that theory by acknowledging that she has found no proof that Henrietta brought the Salvator Mundi from France. What does stand on solid ground arrives in 1649, when, Following the execution of Charles I on the 30th of January, the painting appears registered in the inventory of the English Royal Collection with a valuation of £30. A year later, something happens that explains why Leonardo's name became welded to this work. The engraver Wenceslaus Höhler produced an etching after the painting bearing a Latin inscription that read, Leonardo da Vinci pinxit, that is, Leonardo da Vinci painted it, and that print counts among the first times anyone explicitly tied this image to the master. The painting continued changing hands. In 1651, it was sold in the so-called Commonwealth sale to a certain John Stone. In 1660, it returned to the crown with Charles II. It then passed through the Duke of Buckingham, and in 1763, the Duke's son put it up for auction before the work vanished completely. Here beats the heart of the mystery, and it is a genuine mystery, nothing fabricated. Between 1763 and the year 1900, the Salvator Mundi is erased from every known record for nearly 150 years, a century and a half during which no one notes where it is, who keeps it, or what happens to it. A work that may have sprung from Leonardo's workshop and adorned the collection of the kings of England turned into a ghost. When it reappears in 1900, almost no one remembers its value, because that year Sir Francis Cook buys it for £120, and not even as a Leonardo, but attributed to Bernardino Luini, a Lombard painter from the master's circle, whose market value was far lower. The overpaint had altered the face and hair so drastically that neither retained anything original, as a photograph from 1912 betrays. A face that Martin Kemp went so far as to compare to that of a drugged-out hippie. The absolute low point arrives in 1958, when the Cook collection is dispersed and Sotheby's London hammers the panel down for £45, sold as the work of a follower of Leonardo and then attributed to Boltraffio. £45 for a painting that 6 decades later would brush up against $450 million, and that contrast captures the essence of the entire story. The turning point is revealed in 2005, and in a setting no one would ever connect with Leonardo da Vinci, the city of New Orleans. At the St. Charles Gallery that year, the estate of a businessman named Basil Clovis Hendry was being auctioned, and among the lots was number 664, described as, after Leonardo da Vinci, Christ Salvator Mundi. Two dealers, Robert Simon and Alexander Parrish, took it home for $1,175 because they sensed that beneath those layers of overpaint, something far greater lay sleeping. And that is when one of the decisive figures of the tale enters, the restorer, Diane Modestini. The panel landed in the specialist's hands in a dreadful state, blackened, overpainted, and with warped wood, and in the middle of the process a dramatic episode occurred, because when the conservator Monica Griesbach removed a worm-eaten auxiliary panel that had been glued to the back, the painting cracked into 7 pieces that had to be reassembled with adhesive and wood slivers before restoration could even begin. Modestini devoted several years to the work, roughly between 2006 and 2011, and she recounts the precise moment she became convinced she had a genuine Leonardo before her. She discovered a pentimento, that is, a correction by the painter, a thumb that had been shifted and reworked, together with lips rendered without a contour line, and with color transitions she described as perfect, going so far as to state that no other artist could have achieved that. After comparing it with the Gioconda, she concluded that the hand that brought the Mona Lisa to life was the same one that painted the Salvator Mundi. That conviction on the restorer's part would become one of the most contested flanks of the entire affair, because some argued that the intervention was so extensive that the current painting is partly a creation of Modestini herself, and the historian Frank Zollner drove the point home by describing it as partly a masterpiece by Diane Modestini, almost a contemporary piece. We will return to that point. In 2011, the definitive shift fires when the National Gallery in London incorporates the Salvator Mundi into a major Leonardo exhibition curated by Luc Sisson and presents it as a work by the master. For one of the most respected museums on the planet to hang it with the label Leonardo amounts, in practice, to a colossal seal of approval. The following year, the painting traveled on loan to the Dallas Museum of Art, which tried to raise close to $100 million to keep it, and failed. The money chapter begins in 2013, and it arrives entangled with scandal, because that year the Swiss dealer Yves Bouvier purchased the work for $80 million in a transaction brokered by Sotheby's, which pocketed $3 million, and almost immediately resold it to the Russian billionaire Dmitry Rybolovlev for $127.5 million. The markup came to $47.5 million in a single lightning-fast resale, and that figure lit the fuse of what would become known as the Bouvier Affair, a lawsuit that ended up splashing across courts around the world. We now arrive at the night that elevated it to legend, November 15, 2017, in the Christie's sales room in New York. The painting carried an estimate of $100 million, already an outlandish figure, but what happened surpassed every prior calculation. The bidding stretched for just under 20 minutes and boiled down to two bidders locked in an escalating duel, with a leap that jumped from $332 million to $350 million in a single bid, and barely 18 minutes in it vaulted from $370 to $400 million in one stroke. The hammer fell at $400 million, and once the buyer's premium was added, the total climbed to $450 million, $312,500, $450.3 million, crowning it as the most expensive work of art ever sold at auction. That price shattered the previous record, held by a Picasso, Les Femmes d'Alger, which had sold for $179.4 million in 2015, meaning the Salvator Mundi more than doubled that mark. The buyer's identity remained shrouded in mystery for weeks, until in December 2017, the New York Times, in a report by David Kirkpatrick, pointed to a Saudi prince, Badr bin Abdullah Al Saud, although that same report and additional information from the Wall Street Journal clarified that Badr was not buying for himself, but acting as an intermediary, a frontman, for the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. The painting had a new owner, and that owner was about to make it disappear once more. After the auction, it was announced that the Salvator Mundi would be displayed at the Louvre Abu Dhabi with a set date, September 18, 2018, and without clear explanation, that unveiling was cancelled or postponed with no new timetable, leaving the slot empty. Here begins the strangest stretch of all, because since 2017, the work has not been shown in public again, and its whereabouts have once more become an enigma, this time fueled by quite specific theories. In June 2019, outlets including ArtNet and Bloomberg reported that the painting was sailing aboard the Serene, Mohammed bin Salman's yacht, a vessel 134 meters long that Bloomberg placed in the Red Sea off Sharm el-Sheikh, meaning a possible Leonardo, perhaps the last one in private hands, was riding the waves inside a yacht. The versions kept shifting. Toward the end of 2020, it was said the painting had been taken off the vessel and moved to a secret location in Saudi Arabia, awaiting a museum in the Al Ula Cultural Complex, and in August 2024, a BBC report by Jonathan Rugman suggested it was resting in a warehouse in Geneva. In that same piece, Bernard Heikel, a Princeton professor and acquaintance of Mohammed bin Salman, relayed the prince's words, that he yearned to build an enormous museum in Riyadh and was looking for an anchor piece capable of drawing crowds the way the Mona Lisa does, while in November 2024 other sources hinted that the final destination would be a museum within the Grand King Salman Park project in Riyadh, ready in time for Expo 2030. The most honest fact of all still stands. Saudi Arabia has never officially confirmed that it possesses the painting, so the yacht, Geneva, and the Riyadh Museum coexist as unverified reports that have been stepping on one another, and the only absolute certainty is this. Right now, the public cannot see the Salvator Mundi, and no one can pinpoint its hiding place with confidence. All of this flows into the question that runs through the entire story from top to bottom, whether those $450 million were paid for a Leonardo or for a work that may not have come entirely from his hand. The attribution remains genuinely contested, and not in some minor skirmish, because in the Defender's Trench stand Luke Sisson, who hung it in the National Gallery, alongside Martin Kemp and the restorer Diane Modestini herself. Facing them wait skeptics of considerable stature, starting with Carmen Baumbach of the Metropolitan Museum in New York, who assigns it chiefly to Leonardo's workshop and assistants, followed by Frank Zollner, who bets on a probable pupil with the master's intervention, and joined by Matthew Landris of Oxford, Jacques Franck, and the critic Jerry Saltz, all of them with well-articulated reservations. The episode that best crystallizes that tension erupted at the Louvre in Paris in 2019, when the museum was preparing a major Leonardo show and had examined the painting with scientific rigor. The expectation would have been to make it the absolute star, and yet it did not appear, its place taken instead by another version, the so-called Gannet version, attributed to the workshop. The explanations split into two accounts that do not fit together. According to a French documentary by Antoine Vitkin, released in April 2021, several officials maintained that the Louvre's laboratory had concluded in June 2018 that Leonardo had only contributed to the work, and that the Saudis demanded it be presented as 100% Leonardo and hung next to the Gioconda, a condition that President Macron reportedly rejected, comparing it to laundering a $450 million work. The New York Times offers the opposite version, according to which a Louvre report did not question the authenticity, and the real clash arose from the Saudi demand to hang it beside the Mona Lisa, something the curators ruled out on grounds of logistics and security. The museum itself printed a book about the painting in December 2019, whose preface, signed by Jean-Luc Martinez, stated that the study confirmed the attribution to Leonardo, although that volume was withdrawn before distribution, and in the insurance documents, the piece is listed as attributed to Leonardo rather than as his undisputed work. A single word, attributed, that sums up almost the entire dispute. One very specific detail of the painting has become the skeptic's favorite ammunition, and it deserves attention: the crystal orb. The biographer Walter Isaacson highlighted an oddity that is hard to swallow. Leonardo was obsessed with optics and the behavior of light, yet the crystal sphere Christ holds does not produce the distortion it should. Through a solid crystal ball, whatever lies behind would appear inverted and magnified, but here, the robe shows through the other side with barely any alteration. A slip that is hard to pin on Leonardo of all people, although Isaacson later qualified that he continues to accept the work as genuine. The defenders counter with concrete arguments. Martin Kemp denies it is a glass ball, maintaining instead that it is rock crystal with small inclusions, natural cavities that would justify its optical behavior. And in 2019, a team from the University of California, Irvine, published a study that, using computer rendering grounded in the real physics of light, concluded that it was indeed possible to reproduce exactly what the painting shows, using materials and knowledge available around 1500, specifically, a hollow glass orb with a maximum wall thickness of 1.3 millimeters, ruling out in the process that it was a solid stone. The critics do not yield. Michael Daly of ArtWatch UK insists that the absence of distortion weighs as a serious argument against the authorship of a genius of optics, and the orb debate, like that of the attribution as a whole, remains unresolved. We arrive at last at the question that probably brought you here, the role of the Vatican in this painting, and I will answer it candidly, because the reality surpasses any legend. For this specific painting, the $450 million one, there is no documented evidence placing it as the property of the Vatican, of a pope, or of any ecclesiastical collection. Its known trail runs from French and English royalty to private collectors, and from there to the art market. The only direct mention linking this work to the Vatican actually points in the opposite direction, because in a 2013 email revealed by CNN, Yves Bouvier himself warned that the piece had been so heavily restored, and its attribution so hotly debated, that neither the Vatican nor any major museum in the world had expressed interest in acquiring it. In other words, the Vatican did not hide it, and judging by that email, it did not even want it. The connection springs, then, from two sources, both of them real. The first is born of a hypothesis by the historian Frank Zollner, who in a 2019 essay floated a reasoned doubt about whether the Salvator Mundi was actually a Roman painting commissioned by Pope Leo X, citing the resemblance between Christ's vestments and a marble statue of Leo X, preserved in a church in Rome, and reading the crossed band on the chest as a papal stole, though he himself framed it as a historian's conjecture rather than a proven fact, and he doubts the work is entirely by Leonardo. The second source carries far more weight and almost certainly explains the origin of the entire association between Salvator Mundi and the Vatican. There exists another painting of the same subject, a Salvator Mundi attributed to the painter Marco Dogiono, housed in the Galleria Borghese in Rome, and according to the gallery's own official file, that work was a gift from Pope Paul V to his nephew, Cardinal Scipione Borghese, in 1611, accompanied by a donation document dated the 23rd of May 1611, that describes it as a painting by the famous Leonardo da Vinci of the Savior that was in the Vatican. That is the missing link. Yes, there was a Salvator Mundi that was in the Vatican, that a pope gave away, and that was once considered a Leonardo, only it is not this painting but another one, now attributed to Marco Dogiono. The legend of the painting the Vatican hid almost certainly germinates from conflating those two stories, the papal panel from the Borghese and the phantom painting worth $450 million, and separating them does not strip the tale of mystery, it gives it back. It is worth returning to the starting point. We promised a painting sold for $450 million that no one today can see, and the question of whether the Vatican hid it, so it is time to close with what the facts leave on the table. The Salvator Mundi is a small panel of a Christ with a crystal orb, attributed to Leonardo da Vinci in a dispute no one has yet settled, lost for nearly 150 years, resurfaced beyond recognition, sold off for £45 in 1958, repurchased for $1,175 in 2005, and elevated in 2017 to the most expensive work ever auctioned. It was acquired, through an intermediary, by the most powerful man in Saudi Arabia, and since then it has evaporated, sometimes onto a yacht, sometimes into a Geneva warehouse, perhaps on its way to a museum in Riyadh, with no one to confirm it. The Vatican did not hide it, but centuries ago there did exist a savior of the world that a pope owned, that a pope gave away, and that was believed to be by Leonardo. So the truth, as it usually does, turned out to be a story different from the legend, and even harder to believe. £45 and $450 million, that is what the same painting was worth, a painting that passed through kings, billionaires and princes, that perhaps came from Leonardo's hand and perhaps did not, and that at this very moment, as you listen to this, rests in some corner of the world no one can mark on a map. That is the true mystery of the Redeemer.